Today, we'll explore how climate change is disproportionately affecting Central America and the Caribbean, the resulting environmental and human health impacts, and what steps can be taken to create a more equitable future. The Caribbean and Central America are popular tourist destinations, attracting approximately 37.2 million combined visitors annually, due to their natural beauty and diverse landscapes. Countries in these regions, such as Honduras, Jamaica, Costa Rica, and Cuba, rely heavily on exports like agricultural products, medical equipment, and metals for economic profits. Honduras is a major exporter of coffee, tropical fruits, sugarcane, tobacco, corn, and textiles, while Jamaica's key exports include bananas, citrus, coffee, sugar, yams, and rum. Costa Rica is known for exporting coffee, bananas, pineapples, and medical equipment such as syringes and catheters. While Cuba mainly relies on imports for their food supply, they export a large amount of rolled tobacco, nickel, cane sugar, and cigars. Despite contributing minimally to global emissions, these nations face disproportionate impacts of climate change, exacerbated by their reliance on agriculture to produce some of their major exports. Jamaica and Cuba are also especially vulnerable as small island developing states. Their coastal geography and economic reliance on exports to the global north, who drive climate change, leave them particularly susceptible to climate injustices and environmental challenges. Let's explore some of these specific challenges that these countries face with respect to climate change. Among these nations, Honduras stands out as an example of how low-emission countries are grappling with some of the harshest climate impacts. Honduras is a small Central American country, often overlooked compared to popular tourist destinations like Costa Rica, Cuba, or Jamaica. While it is not a typical travel spot for people from high-emissions countries such as Canada, Honduras is deeply impacted by the actions of these nations. Despite contributing minimally to global emissions, Honduras faces severe consequences, including frequent and devastating flooding caused by climate change. With a fragile economy and limited infrastructure, the country struggles to recover from these disasters. For instance, in 2022, Tropical Storm Julia displaced thousands of people, destroyed nearly 100,000 hectares of crops, and worsened food insecurity for 2.6 million Hondurans. This vulnerability is a shared reality for many countries in the region, where the impacts of climate change also intersect with economic challenges and natural disasters. Like Honduras, Jamaica faces its own set of challenges, compounded by its geography as an island state and its historical inequities. Over the past 30 years, Jamaica has experienced an increase in the frequency of natural disasters, including hurricanes, tropical storms, floods, droughts, and landslides, disproportionately affecting marginalized communities. These events, coupled with rising temperatures, have led to sea level rise, water stress for households and agriculture, and shoreline erosion, forcing fish to migrate further from the coast. Small farmers are particularly vulnerable to these climate impacts, such as intensified droughts and rainfall, which result in poor yields, crop failures, livestock mortality, and pest outbreaks, threatening their livelihoods, well-being, and national food security. Fishing communities, often among the poorest citizens, face significant challenges as rising sea levels and natural disasters disrupt their livelihoods, though the impacts are not felt equally. Women are also especially vulnerable, not only in fisheries, but also to environmental hazards. Jamaica's inadequate waste management infrastructure forces many households, primarily women, to burn waste, dump it illegally, or bury it, increasing their exposure to pollutants and health risks. Women from marginalized communities face even higher risks, compounded by systemic inequalities rooted in colonialism, slavery, and racial discrimination, which limit access to essential resources such as clean water, healthcare, and education, further exacerbating their vulnerabilities to environmental and societal challenges. Moving from an island to the mainland, Costa Rica is situated in Central America, with the Pacific Ocean on the west and the Caribbean Sea to the east. Costa Rica is becoming one of the more desirable places to travel to as a tourist, with as many as 2.8 million tourists forecasted for 2024, with more than half being from the US or Canada. Costa Rica may only be home to 5.2 million people, but it has a strong drive to achieving sustainability through decarbonization. Costa Rica also derives almost all of its energy from renewables, and is known to be one of the global leaders when it comes to reaching the sustainability goals by 2050. Even though Costa Rica strives to promote stewardship of their lands, forests, and resources through their conservation and policy practices, there is still the presence of deforestation. This deforestation has impacts on the environment being harvested, but also the indigenous populations caught up in the process. Deforestation leads to the loss of habitat, resources, homes, and culture, all while contributing to negative fluctuations in the carbon cycle and climate change. Like Jamaica, Cuba is a small island developing state, leaving it especially vulnerable to climate change. Cuba is comprised of a few thousand islands, islets, and cays, and is situated at the intersection of the Northern Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic Ocean. It's a mostly low-lying island that is enveloped by bodies of water, leaving it vulnerable to sea level rise as a result of warming temperatures. Cuba is currently in the midst of an economic crisis. Shortages of power, food, and other critical resources plague the country's population, many of which live in poverty and are unable to afford the rising prices of these goods and services. While Cuba is a popular tourist destination like the aforementioned countries, another main contributor to its economy is agriculture. Climate change has resulted in a decline in agricultural outputs and has left Cuba to import a majority of their food, which comes with a high price tag. Despite their shared challenges, the most compelling evidence of climate injustice in Central America and the Caribbean is the disproportionate greenhouse gas emissions between these regions and mega polluters in the global north. In 2022, Costa Rica, Honduras, Cuba, and Jamaica contributed just 0.02, 0.03, 0.06, and 0.02% of global energy-related carbon emissions, respectively. By comparison, the US and China were responsible for 13.51 and 31.11%, respectively. Even though the countries in our case study make negligible contributions to global carbon emissions, they are the ones paying the price for climate change impacts. While these four countries, Honduras, Jamaica, Costa Rica, and Cuba, each face their own unique challenges, the entire region shares many of the same devastating environmental impacts caused by climate change. Increased rainfall is leading to severe flooding across Central America and the Caribbean, resulting in catastrophic damage to land and ecosystems. This heavy rainfall disrupts natural cycles and aggravates the challenges the region already faces. Agriculture, a major contributor to the economies in these regions, is suffering from extreme weather conditions and unpredictable climate patterns. These conditions reduce crop yields and hinder food production, threatening the economic stability of both regions. Sea level rise, driven by warmer temperatures, is another critical environmental threat impacting the region. Coastal areas across these nations are experiencing land loss due to erosion and facing saltwater intrusion that contaminates vital freshwater supplies. In Cuba, this issue is especially severe as much of its land has low elevation and lays dangerously close to sea level. Deforestation contributes to rising temperatures through its unsustainable practices in these regions, further depleting their vital forests. These forests are necessary for protecting biodiversity and acting as carbon sinks, playing an essential role in mitigating climate change. Warming ocean temperatures are causing fish migration patterns to shift, disrupting marine ecosystems and the balance of native species that depend on stable ocean conditions in Central America and the Caribbean. Finally, storms and extreme weather events are becoming much more intense. Hurricanes and tropical storms, which are already frequent in these tropical regions, are growing more destructive, negatively impacting all life they come in contact with. These combined environmental harms highlight the extreme challenges Central America and the Caribbean face due to climate injustice.
In addition to experiencing similar environmental impacts as a result of climate injustice, these regions also experience similar health outcomes. One major health concern in these regions is access to reliable and clean water. As previously mentioned, climate change is fueling sea level rise, natural disasters, and extreme weather events, and unpredictable rainfall in these countries. Floodwater can carry bacteria and viruses, leading to waterborne disease. It can also contaminate local water systems. Natural disasters in these regions are also displacing populations. In Central America, Hurricane Julia displaced thousands of people who were still recovering from the devastating impacts of twin hurricanes Eta and Iota in 2020. With nothing left, Central Americans started migrating north to the United States. However, climate-induced migration poses its own dangers, as these mobile populations face an increased risk of food insecurity, infectious disease spread, and inadequate access to clean water and sanitation. Deforestation in Costa Rica displaces indigenous populations while resulting in the loss of carbon sinks of Costa Rican forests, which further contributes to the climate crisis. The displacement of indigenous populations is rooted in the demand for ranchers, which produce large supplies of beef. These ranchers would take the lands by force to expand. The loss of traditional land leads to physical ailments that are strongly associated with mental and spiritual well-being of the individuals, such as depression, anxiety, and deteriorating physicality. Across Central America and the Caribbean, tropical storms and unpredictable rainfall are impacting the ability of these nations to grow their own food. This leads to a reduced production of agricultural staples, as well as loss of livestock. In Jamaica, climate change also threatens the livelihood of local fishermen, where rising sea levels, coastal erosion, and the destruction of coral reefs are causing fish to migrate further out to sea. Due to a lack of agricultural outputs, these regions are highly dependent on imported food to feed their populations. This has resulted in an increased consumption of ultra-processed foods, which are often the most affordable and most unhealthy option. This may result in malnutrition and increased non-communicable diseases. Poor nutrition especially impacts the physical and mental development of children. In 2021, the United Nations reported that Central America and the Caribbean had 59.7 million people living with hunger, and 267 million people experienced moderate or severe food insecurity. Poverty is very prevalent in Central America and the Caribbean, with 1 in 4 people living in a poor household, leaving these citizens especially vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Women, children, and those of low socioeconomic status are particularly vulnerable, since they often do not have the resources to cope and adapt. Those living in low elevation coastal areas in Central America and the Caribbean are also disproportionately impacted, as they are more prone to natural disasters. These disasters place an additional burden on communities who were already dealing with poverty and other issues before these natural disasters reoccurred. To address the impacts of climate injustice across the Caribbean and Central America, several solutions must be employed by these countries. An important and just mechanism to support climate resilience and disaster relief in these regions is climate financing from mega polluters in the global north. Even though $100 billion in climate finance was promised to the global south countries at COP15 in 2009, this amount was never fully received. More recently, at COP29, a new global finance goal of $300 billion per year was pledged to the Global South, and was finalized despite outcry from the Global South countries that this was not enough money. The Global North countries must uphold their commitment to climate finance for the Global South countries, and their reparations must be proportional to their impact. Food imports are expensive and are not a sustainable solution to feed the populations of these countries, so agricultural systems must become climate resilient to ensure that local food production and livelihoods are preserved. Climate resilient agriculture involves implementing technologies and farming methods such as crop shelters, covering plants with mesh, as well as using seeds and animal breeds that are resistant to drought, heat, pest, and disease. The World Food Programme currently funds climate resilient agriculture in Cuba, which has been successful in preventing agricultural losses. Due to rising sea level and more intense storms in the Caribbean, fishing communities are among the most vulnerable to climate change. It is essential to focus on strategies such as institutional and livelihood adaptations, risk reduction, and resilience management. Using fish aggregate devices, FADs, can help alleviate pressure on overfished reefs while maintaining or even increasing fishers' incomes by bringing fish closer to shore. Additionally, restoring degraded habitats caused by climate change through initiatives like mangrove planting or installing artificial reefs can enhance coastal protection for these communities. Countries like Jamaica could also adopt strategies like Belize's, where pH monitoring is used to safeguard vital fisheries such as conch and lobsters from the impacts of ocean acidification. Costa Rica has implemented government land purchases to sustain land conservation and stewardship programs and perpetuate the traditional knowledge of the indigenous communities. Increasing policies preventing deforestation would help reduce the amount of precipitation that contributes to flooding events and maintain other ecosystem services. Another solution is to ensure that sustainability and conservation remain a core value of Costa Ricans through public awareness campaigns, while working to elect government officials that share the same core values. These solutions are vital, but their full potential can be better realized with the support of the Global North. The wealth and advanced technology of countries in the Global North can provide financial aid, share sustainable practices, and advocate for fair climate policies, while empowering these regions to build resilience and mitigate further damages. By leveraging the power of social media, we can amplify these issues, highlight the climate injustice facing Central America and the Caribbean, and inspire collective action. This can be done through informative posts on Instagram, X, Facebook, Snapchat, and more to spread the global awareness. Public engagement is key to driving the support needed to implement these solutions effectively and equitably. While these countries are in the same geographic region and they face similar environmental challenges, the solutions require a varied scope and timeline, spanning from 1 to 25 years. In the first 2 years, efforts would focus on promoting equitable practices to reduce marginalization and establish pathways for contributions from the Global North. Years 3 to 10 prioritize societal development, including improving agriculture, flood-resistant infrastructures, and community-centered policies, alongside reinforcing early initiatives. The 25-year timeline accounts for changing government cycles and ensures extended time for these measures to take root and progress, despite potential setbacks. In conclusion, the climate injustice faced by Central America and the Caribbean demands urgent global attention. These regions, despite contributing little to climate change, are suffering disproportionately from its effects, from extreme weather events to agricultural destruction. It's clear that the Global North must take responsibility, both through direct action to mitigate further damage and by supporting these vulnerable countries in building resilience. The solutions we've discussed are crucial, but they require global solidarity, increased awareness, and collective action to be truly effective. The time to act is now, and we all have a role to play in addressing this injustice.